Welcome to Wednesday's edition of COVID-19. Greater engagement with the arts is looking possible in the foreseeable future as efforts to contain the pandemic shift from zero tolerance to practical intervention. Now, we have more on these sights and sounds from the arts arena later on the program. Here first is the broader pandemic coverage with our Kwon So-ah. Now, So I see Korea is looking at a surge in daily cases today.
Right, Sunny. And unfortunately, it has become the norm that we are seeing over 2,000 cases on a Wednesday. In fact, 2,050 is the number we have reported here in the country as of 12 a.m. And that includes over 2,000 domestically transmitted infections. It is a rise for the second straight day, and it's also up by around 450 cases from Wednesday. It is also a slight uptick from last Wednesday. And as you can see here on this graph, Wednesday figures usually look like this. And for the sixth time, we're now seeing over 2,000 infections here in the country. With that, Korea has accumulated 265,423 infections with 2,334 fatalities linked to the virus. By region, Gyeonggi-do province has recorded its highest daily caseload here with 703 infections, followed by 671 in the capital Seoul, and that's also the second highest figure for a daily single caseload. And recently, the Greater Seoul area is making up the majority of new infections. 73.3% is the proportion we're seeing on this Wednesday. Now, what had started with a large outbreak in the capital region since the beginning of the fourth wave, so at the beginning of July, and gradually spread to other parts, now is affecting the capital area once again. And this is seen as a very dangerous signal, according to authorities.
2주 뒤에 추석 연휴를 앞두고 있습니다.
The Chuseok holidays begin in 2 weeks. With the spread of COVID-19 worsening in the capital region, we urgently need cooperation from our nation's people. What's especially important is to improve the situation in the capital area to lower the risk of the virus spreading to other regions, which can occur due to movement during the holidays.
In its assessment of movement across the country, the government noted an increase by 3% nationwide in the past week compared to the week before. It's also a rise for the second consecutive week, attributed to a sense of public fatigue from the prolonged restrictions. Officials are not ruling out difficulties in managing treatment if infections in the Greater Seoul area continue to rise. Currently, 69 patients are said to be under self-treatment in the capital region, and that includes 31-person households and 32 children or their guardians. Now, officials and health experts continue to stress how important vaccination is, and not only to get the infections down, but also the number of people that get seriously ill due to COVID-19, and also to get the death toll down as well. Now, while 61% of the nation's population has received at least one dose as of 12 a.m. this Wednesday, the 70% goal at this pace is expected to be reached by September 19th. According to recent calculations.
I see. Meanwhile, so the Global Health Agency says chances of completely eradicating the COVID-19 virus are low.
Right, Sunny. Well, once there was a stronger belief that the coronavirus could be eradicated, the World Health Organization's Executive Director Mike Ryan said on Tuesday that the virus is likely here to stay with us, and that it will evolve like influenza viruses, and that especially because the virus keeps mutating in unvaccinated countries. But even countries that have higher vaccination rates, those are also struggling with their own concerns. Here, the U.S., with a total of 41.2 million infections, now registered more cases in 2021 than in the past year. And then we've got the U.K. with 7 million infections in total, with 30,000 to 40,000 daily infections. The government for now says that a firebreak lockdown in October should be its last resort. Israel, meanwhile, in October is likely to achieve herd immunity, according to some experts there. And then we've got Cuba here, which has just reached above 704,000 infections, which has started to vaccinate its toddlers with its homegrown vaccine. Singapore, the numbers are not looking as bad in other places, of course, but still, Singapore has hit over 320 infections in the past day, and that is the highest figure in the past year. And the total number of infections around the globe stands at 222.7 million, with over 742,000 infections reported in the past 24 hours. And those are the updates I have for now. I'll see you back on Thursday. Sunny?
All right, so as always, thank you very much for the coverage.
My pleasure.
Right, let's now take a closer look at Korea's efforts to ensure a gradual return to normality as public inoculation numbers continue to rise. Now, for more, I have Kim Sung-yeon here in the studio with me. Sung-yeon, welcome.
Good afternoon.
Right, now let's begin with the government's call for caution regarding the expression living with COVID-19, Sung-yeon.
That's right. The expression first came to use a couple of months back, but there have been many different interpretations of what it actually means. The government in particular said the term is too vague and possibly misleading. Authorities stressed that as of now, their most urgent task is to curb the number of new infections. Now, living with COVID-19 generally refers to a change in strategy to focus on the management of critically ill patients and the fatality rate rather than total caseloads. But experts have warned that a loose understanding of that expression could lead people to believe that we can immediately lift all social distancing restrictions. Son Young-rae, a senior health official, says the government is discouraging the use of that term in favor of an alternative which clearly emphasizes the need to maintain precautions even as restrictions are gradually eased.
Instead of using the phrase living with COVID-19, we believe it's more appropriate to describe our strategy as a phased return to normality.
Lee said that such a plan has to meet several requirements to be sustainable in the long run. They include broad acceptance from the public, minimized disruptions to everyday lives, and a manageable number of cases that is within the capacity of Korea's healthcare system.
Right. And Sung-yeon, what has been the public response to this proposed transition?
Well, Sunny, public opinion seems to be quite divided. Some are saying Korea should move away from its zero COVID strategy, while others are saying more restrictions are needed to tackle the ongoing fourth wave before any easing can take place. Now, in a recent poll conducted by the government, nearly 3/4 of the respondents said they were in favor of a shift in strategy towards more easing. More than half of them also said that the change should take place later this year when the country's vaccination coverage is expected to be at a high level.
52.4% of the respondents said we should transition to our eased containment measures when more than 70% of the nation's people have been fully vaccinated.
Meanwhile, over 85% of the respondents said there must be fewer than 1,000 daily cases for restrictions to be eased. According to the KDCA, the poll results show that Korean residents have a different view on how normalcy is defined compared to their counterparts in the UK and the US.
Right, and Sung-yeon, speaking about the UK and the US, I suppose Korea can take away a few lessons learned from the experiences of these two countries, especially with regard to their prompt ease in social restrictions, right?
Yes, that's a good point you mentioned. We can look at countries like the US, the UK, and even Israel. I must say they have paid a heavy price for doing just that. Computer simulations by the KDCA, in fact, show that the country could see tens of thousands of daily cases, even with a 70% vaccination rate, if all the restrictions are lifted at once. Now, Son Young-rae, a senior health official, said a grim case study can be found in the UK, which is reporting 20 to 30,000 daily cases and around 100 daily deaths since it eased all restrictions. Also in the US, a summer that began with plunging caseloads has ended with soaring fatalities, overcrowded hospitals, and a bitter realization that the virus is going to remain a fact of life just like in other countries. Son further emphasized that no country in the world has been able to completely reopen and at the same time maintain a low number of fatalities.
So what exactly is our next move then?
Well, Sunny, the government does want to take things slowly and ease restrictions one at a time when the appropriate time comes. Authorities stress that the nation's people must be on guard throughout the entire process, or infections could rebound and derail our efforts in returning to normal life. Now, with the country's vaccination campaign picking up steam, health authorities this morning announced the transition may begin in earnest at around mid-November if all goes right. And at a previous government briefing, the KDCA mentioned that social distancing rules adjustments could be made as early as October if there are signs of improvement in the current outbreak.
추석 연휴를 포함하여
If we can weather through the next 4 weeks, including the Chuseok holidays, and stabilize the current outbreak, it may be possible to adjust our social distancing measures to something resembling a return to normal, starting in October.
However, the government said the most urgent task at hand is to stabilize the outbreak within this month before any consensus can be reached on the relaxing of measures in the future. They asked the nation's people to keep their focus on the immediate challenges facing the country instead of looking too far ahead when the current fourth wave has yet to subside.
All right, Songyeon, as always, thank you very much for the update.
Thank you for having me.
Right, on the international arena, Lebanon has marked 1 year since the tragic losses of lives and massive destruction and displacement caused by a catastrophic blast in Beirut's port early last August. For more, I have Zahir Abdul Sattar live on the line. Zahir, welcome.
Hi, Sunny. Good morning from Lebanon, and thanks for having me.
Right, Zahir. It's been a year, Zahir, since the horrific explosion killed at least 200 people, injured 7,000 others, and rendered some 300,000 homeless. And yet, Zahir, no one has been held accountable. What more can you tell us?
Absolutely. So, just like you said, there's around 218 people that died, more than 7,000 injured. But it's important also to note that out of those, there were 150 people that were permanently disabled as a result of the explosion. And 300,000 without a home. That's basically 6% of the Lebanese population were displaced. The explosion also affected the health sector. 6 hospitals and more than 22 health facilities suffered damages of varying degrees, and several of those hospitals, Sunny, suffered severe damages to the point that they could not admit patients anymore. So coming back to the question, it's important to remember that the needs and challenges of the wounded, the permanently disabled, and the displaced are really not the same. The permanently disabled required extensive reconstructive surgery because of the massive scarring, and many of them still undergo surgeries and rehabilitations up till now. And many of the displaced are still without a house up till now. This is only the population that was affected by the blast. There's the population that was indirectly affected by the blast. There's the family and friends of those who died. Many had traumatic memories that would last a lifetime. And really, Sunny, there's a national sense of trauma and emotional scars that were caused by the event. And just like you said, up till now, no one has been held accountable, unfortunately, and we're still waiting for that. And one major thing for those who were affected by the blast is because there was no one that was held accountable, there's basically no closure for them.
Right. And even against that backdrop, less than a fortnight following that grim anniversary, Zahir, I believe there was another explosion in Lebanon's northern region of Akka that killed at least 20 people. What was the cause of that blast?
Yeah, absolutely. So a bit of context, but it seems that in our country we go from one tragedy to the next. Unfortunately, but just a bit of a context, the country has been going through a severe fuel shortage for several months now. And the reason is three folds. First, the economic situation, economic crisis, which caused a shortage of dollars, which means that we can't import fuel into the country. The second reason is smuggling to our neighboring country, Syria. because over there the fuel prices are much higher, so people are smuggling fuel to Syria. And the third and a really main reason is hoarding. And the hoarding of the fuel is happening by the population, by fuel stations, and by fuel distribution companies. So as a result, recently we've seen the army cracking down on hoarders and smugglers. And just like you said, on the 15th of August, the Lebanese army confiscated a warehouse in North Lebanon. There was 60,000 liters of gasoline stored, and the order was given to distribute that gasoline to the population. So obviously the residents gathered to get the fuel, and for an unknown reason as of yet, the fuel tank exploded. It killed 20 people and burned more than 80 others. Many of the injured had so severe burns to the point that they eventually died, and many were actually moved outside Lebanon to Turkey and other countries as well.
Right, you mentioned the economic crisis in Lebanon, Zahir. Now, according to World Bank, Lebanon has been hit by one of the worst economic hardships that the world has seen since the 1850s. Can you put this reality into perspective for us?
Absolutely. It's just like the World Bank said, it's the worst since 150 years. Just without going too much into the reasons behind this, but basically the outcome, because the reasons are so complex and it's not a recent event that caused the crisis. But the outcome is that the country's currency, which is the Lebanese lira, has been devalued by more than 90%. Now, what does that mean from the practical perspective? So I think, Sunny, I can give you a couple of scenarios that maybe can give you a glimpse into the economic situation. So a person who gets paid twice the minimum wage, previously, before the economic crisis, that was around $900 US. Right now, that's equivalent to $75, and that can barely cover the basic necessities, let alone if you have a family to support. Another scenario is that, imagine you wake up, you want to shower, there is no water because there's fuel shortage to allow the water pumps to work in the first place. Imagine that now you need to pay for water to be delivered to your house, but there's also no fuel for water trucks to deliver the water in the first place. You want to go to work, no fuel in your car. You decide to take a cab, right? But they're either not working or prices have become very exorbitantly high. So you try to work remotely, but there's no electricity and very spotty internet connection. Just to give you a perspective on this, we've had a 25-year civil war back in 1975. And people who lived that war, Sunny, unanimously say that the situation now is way worse from an economic perspective.
Zahir, you give me those examples, and yet, yes, I cannot imagine the plight that the people are enduring there in Lebanon. Now, you mentioned 6 hospitals that had been destroyed during last year's blast. Now, I'm assuming access to medical equipment and treatment, therefore, has been virtually impossible. Zahir, I hear about people taking to the streets, cancer patients choosing to take to the streets in light of the absence of medical care. Could you tell us a bit about this?
Absolutely. So Sunny, it's not just cancer patients who can get their medication, and it's not just medications that are scarce right now. It's basically the health system collapsing due to the economic situation, and that means insurance can't cover treatment. There's absence of basic medications. There's absence of basic medical supplies. We used to be a country that's famous for medical tourism. People from different countries around us used to come to Lebanon because of our world-class hospitals. Now those same hospitals cannot seem to find basic medications as simple as antibiotics to admit patients for surgery. And this is really the phenomena that we have been seeing.
Now, Zahir, given these circumstances, I can only assume that COVID-19 containment efforts in Lebanon are the least of the country's worries. Am I right?
Yeah, absolutely, Sunny. I mean, in the situation in regards to COVID in Lebanon, since the pandemic began, we've had 500,000 cases and more than 8,000 dead in a population of 6 million. And that's quite a high number. Right now, we're in the fourth wave. We're averaging around 850 cases. Really, a lot of efforts have been put into trying to follow on the cases. For example, our institute, the Global Health Institute, created a dashboard for this. But absolutely, I mean, now we are lucky because we did not have a steep wave similar to the one that we had in February. But if we had one right now, with the health system collapsing, it would be a really catastrophic situation.
Right. And one final question, Zahir, very briefly. How are talks proceeding over the makeup of a new cabinet to replace the one that quit last year following Beirut's port blast?
Yeah, I mean, Sunny, I can give you the words that they use. The words that they use that we have been hearing for over a year is that in the next 48 hours, the cabinet will be formed. There's the last few touches. The light is at the end of the tunnel. And these words have been repeating again and again and again. And the irony in all of this, Sunny, is that the political parties that are the reason behind the severe challenges that we have faced. They are the same ones that are trying to form the government that will supposedly resolve these changes. Really, we have created a system of governance that keeps perpetually recreating itself, unfortunately, Sunny.
I see. All right, Zahir, thank you for making the time to join us live with your thoughts at this very early hour at your end, and do take care.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Sunny.
Right, shifting gears now, we share with you the diverse marketing strategy of cars here on the local front in the wake of the pandemic, ranging from online promotions to offline experience centres. Do take a look.
Online car market emerged as a new sales channel for many car makers, and that is one of the most noticeable changes that the pandemic brought to the automotive industry.
One South Korean car maker recently established a new online car sales platform. Up until now, preliminary contracts were signed online at times, though. This online platform marks the first time that non-face-to-face car sales channel from contract to payment has been established.
사람들한테 많이들 또 얘기도 듣고 그리고 추천도 많이 받아서 하는 편이라 굳이 차를 갖다가 직접 보지 않아도 온라인 판매를 만약에 시작한다면 그렇게 해서도 구매할 수 있을 것 같습니다.
직접 가지 않아도 되니까 조금 더 편리하고 거리 두기가 조금 더 잘 실천되지 않나 그렇게 생각합니다.
In fact, data shows that sales of automobiles and related goods increased 61.7% year-on-year in the first quarter of 2020 when the pandemic broke out. Now the car market is changing rapidly in line with the COVID-19 era. From selling cars through live commerce to unveiling new models online, car makers are actively using online platforms.
Meanwhile, offline car dealerships are also keeping pace in the fast-changing world.
As part of their self-help efforts, car dealerships are increasingly becoming autonomous with robots providing non-face-to-face services to customers, and they turn into unmanned stores at night. Another thing to note is that customers are given more opportunities to get behind the wheel of the cars they wish to buy.
Today, I'm at a car exhibition showroom which opened just recently. So unlike conventional ones that merely showcase their new models, at here you are given opportunities to get behind the wheel to have a more of a practical and interactive experiences.
The biggest difference between the existing dealership and this place is that you can tour with a docent and experience a variety of things. Instead of just merely looking at the vehicle, you can experience the actual model and listen to various functions and performances that the car has to offer.
기존에 이제 전통적인 자동차를 전시하고 판매만 하던 그런 쇼룸의 형태를 벗어나서 고객들이 차량에 대해서 자유롭게 탐색하고 다양한 컨텐츠를 통해서 경험할 수 있는 그런 실체적인 체험을 제공하는 공간입니다.
Also, from the color to interior finishes, people can customize their cars. They can also get price information and even experience the speed through a virtual simulation. While online sales platforms are gaining popularity amid the pandemic, offline stores are featuring their own strength in-store experience. Thanks to this change, the number of people who purchased vehicles in Seoul increased despite the deep economic recession caused by COVID-19. As of December 2020, the number of registered vehicles in Seoul increased by over 33,000 compared to the same month in 2019.
대한민국은 도시 봉쇄는 없으면서 정상적인 비즈니스를 활동을 하는 이런 상태였기 때문에 일단 대중교통수단보다도 자가용을 가지고 이동하는 것이 안전하다는 인식이 컸어요. 최근에 들어와서 차박 문화, 우리 오토 캠핑 문화도 확산되는 것도 이동뿐만이 아니라 놀거리, 먹거리를 안전하게 구현을 하겠다라는 부분이 커지고 있기 때문에 성공적으로 이 자동차 판매가 이루어졌다 이렇게 말씀드릴 수가 있습니다.
The pandemic has changed the meaning of the car from as a means of transportation to a personal, private space.
정신 바짝 차리죠. 코로나요. 국가 비상사태라고.
지금 현재 코로나로 고생을 하시는 모든 분들이 그 캐릭터 안에 다 담겨 있습니다.
It's amazing to have Broadway back.
The whole theatre full of people, it was so nice to see.
코비드는 사라지고 영화는 계속 살아남게 될 거라고 믿습니다.
The pandemic has had a profound effect on the arts across the globe, with theatres shut and concerts cancelled. But the winds of change are now blowing slowly and tangibly. And for more on this reality, I have pop culture critic Kim Young-dae here in the studio. It's good to see you again, Young-dae.
Good afternoon, Sunny.
Right, and I also have Professor Chi Hye-won from Kyung University. Welcome back, Professor Chi.
Good afternoon.
Joining the session virtually is theatre critic Peter Marks over in New York. It's a pleasure to have you with us, Peter.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Sunny.
Right, we'll start here in the studio then. Young-dae, I hear the pandemic is emerging as a popular plotline among recent screen productions. Let's start with that.
Yeah, well, there are already a lot of literature and songs were produced reflecting the emotions that we felt during the pandemic. But now it went to the screen and TV screen. So one of them is definitely The Rain Comes Soon. We already saw some footage over there. It's called 습도 다소 높음. So it is based on located in the theater called 낭만극장, and each character is really interesting. But the thing is, it all reflects how they felt during this pandemic, and a little reaction from each other and the relationship, but the commonality is how individual human beings would feel and struggle during this pandemic. The other thing is a pretty recent episode of Good Doctors, American TV drama, and in this particular episode, it definitely reflects the human emotions and experience usually, but that particular episode is definitely dealing with the pandemic situation and the patients and all the like a little history and how they struggled during this pandemic. So, well, definitely pop culture always reflects how we feel at the time, at that very moment. So it's quite natural, well, in that phenomenon recently.
Right, that the pandemic is taking the plot lines then. Professor Ji, what has been the impact now of the fourth wave here in the country on the local performance theatre?
Yeah, actually theatres are still running in spite of the fourth wave of pandemic, but it has been harsh since July because one of the biggest obstacles are restricted operating hours, as the theaters should also have been closed by 10 p.m. as the other stores or institutions. So many companies, theater companies, should reschedule their shows or modify the seating plans, or sometimes they refund the tickets. So they always organize the preventive protocols for the theater audiences. So actually it causes some of the audience members inconvenience or decreases their interest, and eventually it also affects the industry growth. Actually, it is really hard for all the theater companies. However, as the COVID-19 vaccination increases, the theater community expects actually the restrictions, they would ease, and the more the audiences come back to the theater, hopefully this fall.
Right, hopefully that will be the case.
Yes.
Meanwhile, Peter, curtains have gone up on Broadway this month following its shutdown in March last year. Do start a bit with the overall atmosphere there.
Well, Sunny, I would say there's excitement, but it's mixed with great anxiety about what's going to happen. We've had 4 shows start performances on Broadway, and there are plans for about 40 more over the Broadway season to begin performances. But the levels of ticket sales are not the kinds of big box office that we're used to. About 2/3 of the audience on Broadway is traditionally a tourist audience. And those people are not coming back. Those are international tourists and people from around the country. It's really only people from the New York area who have access at this point to the theater. So there's a lot of trepidation about whether these shows, which depend on full capacity in their spaces, and these are spaces of between 1,000 and 2,000 seats, they have to sell most, if not all, of those seats to survive. So there's a real question of survival here, and that question is totally up in the air.
I see. Having said that, Peter, are there any support measures perhaps in place by city officials to help Broadway?
That's a great question, Sunny. For months, there was a campaign to get the federal government to provide funding. And as a result of that, $16 billion was made available to producers and to venue operators of theaters and clubs all over the country. That money has started to be sent around the country, and it has saved a lot of spaces. That's a lot of money going into the arts and entertainment industry from the federal government, and unprecedented in the history of this country, which has really depended on free enterprise rather than government intervention to fund the arts.
Right, we're seeing lots of firsts during this pandemic.
Indeed.
Meanwhile, right, back here on the local front, Professor Ji, do you suppose the reopening of Broadway, or do you see it as perhaps affecting Korea's musical endeavors?
Yeah, I believe so. Because one of the big reasons Broadway is representing the theater industry, the global industry, and the live theater is one of the most affected business by COVID-19 pandemic because it's live. So reopening the theater district in New York City, that means we are getting ready to back to the normal life, and which actually will make more audience members, including tourists, to come back to the theater. And actually that directly or indirectly make an effect on the South Korean market as well, I think. And I also believe the international theatrical market, including the touring productions, will resume soon.
Right, hopefully again.
Hopefully.
Young, it appears that over-the-top platforms are being embraced by movie makers and even organizers of film festivals, including the Venice International Film Festival. What are your thoughts now on this phenomenon?
Well, the bottom line is they got to do what they got to do at this point. You know, whatever option they have to do it. So OTT, well, screening OTT only movies on the theater is one option. It's not a perfect solution, but it's one of the options they have to do it right now. I mean, the whole pandemic unprecedented situation, because it is unprecedented moment in the human history, but the whole situation really changed the landscape of the hierarchy of the how movie is shown, but the how actually the audience would consume the material. So actually Korean industry as a whole was built on the system of kind of virtuous cycling system of like movie screen on theater, you know, ticket sales, or going back to the investment. But right now, OTT comes first. So they have to find a way in a different type of like a solution to this different environment. But for the audience, for the you know, the ordinary people, it is quite an opportunity to, you know, have lots of movies at home with one or two platforms without going to the theater. But I think it would not replace the whole experience of movie going or movie watching, because it is not just movie going, but it's the actions, going to the theater, you know, eating popcorn with your friends or with your girlfriend, boyfriend. So it would be, well, again, they got to do what they got to do at this point. That this is one of the solution they have to do it right now.
Right. Peter, generally speaking, how has the pandemic affected America's pop culture industry, would you say?
It's a great question. And again, there's a change happening, I think, in theater-going habits for film goers. They're still buying tickets, and of course, it's been devastating in this business. You know, there was something like a decline from 2019 of something like $11 billion in theatrical ticket sales that declined to about $2.2 billion in 2020. So that's a huge drop. But I think something permanent is changing in the way people want to consume different kinds of movies, and they still want to go to a big theater for the spectacle movies, for the superhero films, which are still being churned out by Hollywood, the big budget movies. But for smaller films, I think the audience is really now a home viewing driven audience. I think that is what's changing, and we're seeing it even in the release of some films that have not performed well as expected because they are such. We had a musical, Hamilton, that did very well for Disney Plus as a streaming movie. And then Lin-Manuel Miranda's next movie, In the Heights, was released theatrically and didn't do well because I think most people now expect to see that kind of movie at home.
I see. Meanwhile, Peter, what can you tell us about measures in place within theatres to ensure a safe experience for both the viewers and the performers?
Well, it's fascinating, Sunny, because we were told here in New York for a long time that that South Korea, at Seoul, had figured out a way to keep theaters running during the pandemic. So it was really, it's really fascinating to me to hear this discussion about what is going on now in South Korea, because we looked at that as a model. What's going on now in New York on Broadway and across the country is a mandated vaccination proof to get into a theater. You must have proof of vaccination and you must be wearing a mask. But once inside the theater, we're not seeing social distancing anymore. That has gone away. All cast and crew members have to be vaccinated and are tested regularly, both PCR tests and rapid antigen tests. That is universal. That is now universal in theaters in most of the country. And so I think maybe the measures are more severe now in New York than they might be in Seoul. I'm not sure of that, but it's taken incredibly seriously.
Right. I think the seating arrangement in theatres here in Korea is that you need to take a seat like two seats apart from the next party, is it?
At this point,
right.
At this point the friends or the one group can sit together. And we has to be like an empty seat, one empty seat between the groups.
I see, right. Professor Ji, staying with containment efforts within theatres then, what COVID-19 prevention measures do you further propose to ensure a safe and rewarding experience of arts?
Actually, at this point, all the creative team, the crew members, and the actors, and everyone work for the theater should take the COVID-19 test regularly, and there are strict safety protocols for the audience members as well. And inside the theater, even though there are some cases, we have been doing okay so far. But however, we still need to sort out and negotiate the safety protocols as the vaccination rate increases. And for instance, like Broadway, we could consider to require vaccinate proof for all the audiences, including tourists, and the members and all the members as well as performers, backstage crews, and the theater staff for all performances. That could be an option, I think.
Right, so taking proactive measures.
Yes.
Youngdae, let's now turn to the music industry. I believe Korea's BTS is continuing to make remarkable strides and cross global charts. What is the latest on K-pop amid the pandemic?
Well, this morning, BTS was going back to #1 spot. This is the 11th week, I believe, at the #1 spot, which is remarkable itself. But not just BTS, Blackpink and NCT 127 and other K-pops, their popularity is skyrocketing globally. So, well, in general, K-pop, especially mainstream idol industry, was doing pretty good during this pandemic. Probably one of two increasing scene last year and this year, globally, along with Latin American pop music. So this is quite exceptional case, but as a whole, the music industry, they definitely struggle with this pandemic situation, and a lot of regulation and restrictions, and the inconsistency of it really bothers the players at the scene. So we definitely hope to, make a better and a proper restriction and protocol for that matter. But in general, K-pop's doing pretty good these days. Yeah.
Right. Youngdae, staying with K-pop, amid measures to rein in the entertainment industry by authorities in neighboring China, a social media site there recently suspended 22 K-pop fan accounts. Could you tell us a bit more about this?
21, 22, I don't remember, but this is really a shocker. So Weibo, the biggest SNS platform in China, suspended 21, 22 fan accounts, which is not a permanent ban. It is 30 days, 60 days. But it was not really, for me, it was not really an independent decision by Weibo, because last year, Chinese cyberspace administration made a clear statement. They would control over sort of immoral, illogical, the fan sites behavior online. So I don't know what that is, but they would definitely control the kind of behavioral consumption. Something like multiple purchase of one songs or multiple albums or online streaming, whatever that is. But I don't think essentially it is not really about the music or popular culture. They definitely have a kind of policy for the last few years over the K-pop or Hallyu or westernized pop music, but it's much to do with the President Xi's the kind of attempt to make a tightening his grip on the society and the younger generation as a whole.
Right. Professor Ji, streamed versions of pre-recorded theatrical productions have been garnering much popularity amid the pandemic. What more can you tell us about this particular trend?
Not only the pre-recorded, like streaming live stages, has been increased since last year, largely increased actually in South Korea since last year. And then just filming or virtual theaters or like creating short version of the plays or musicals and presented on YouTube has been expanded actually. So I believe actually the more audiences getting more involved in enjoying the theater on media platform, and the more streaming platform, online platform has been launched for the services in this year, only in this year. So I think even after the theater come back to normal, I believe the business of theater on media platform will be constantly developed, like Broadway.
Right, I see. And Peter, I think we have like about a minute, but what's on Broadway's performance calendar for the rest of this year?
Oh my goodness, it's a crowded calendar. There's a lot going on. First of all, of course, all the big shows are coming back. We have on September 14th, we have Lion King, Wicked, and Hamilton all starting back on the same day. And later, a little bit later in the month, a musical that has the potential to be a big hit from London called Six, a rock musical based on the 6 wives of Henry VIII, the English, of course, king, who liked to marry and then knock the heads off his wives. But aside from that, we've got a bunch of new plays coming. Interestingly, I just wanted to note, we did have a musical called K-Pop that was coming to Broadway. I just wrote about this. They canceled its Washington engagement that was supposed to happen before Broadway because of COVID and money fears. They just didn't know that they could make back the money at this point. It was just too crowded a field. But I was really looking forward to seeing that. So I'm hoping that they reschedule it for sometime soon.
Right, I hope so too, and then we could have you back, Peter. All right, thank you very much for your time, Peter, over in New York at this very late hour at your end, and Youngdae here in the studio. Thank you very much, and Professor Chi, as always, thank you for your insights.
Thank you so much.
Right, as scholars in the field say, the sense of connection provided by the sharing of arts experiences is one thing the public needs, especially amid calls for social distancing to fight this pandemic. We'll be back on Thursday. See you then, and thank you for now.